Officer pulled his patrol ship alongside the small, battered vessel drifting near the edge of the neutral zone. The old craft looked like it had seen better decades, hull plates welded over what were clearly battle scars, mismatched engine components, and a paint job that had faded to an unidentifiable gray-brown color. His scanner showed it was running on minimal power, barely maintaining life support. Unidentified vessel, this is Galactic Patrol Officer. You are in violation of traffic laws by operating without proper navigation lights and exceeding safe velocity limits in a civilian zone. Prepare to be boarded for inspection. The response came through his comm with a crackling, tired voice. Copy that, officer. Coming to full stop. Boarding tube is on the port side, though I should warn you, the artificial gravity is a bit wonky on the lower decks. His four eyes blinked in sequence as he processed the accent. Human. That explained the reckless flying. Humans were known throughout the galaxy for their disregard of sensible safety protocols. They were also known for their tendency to end up in places they shouldn't be, doing things that common sense. The officer secured his patrol ship and activated his boarding tube. As he stepped onto the human vessel, he immediately noticed the smell, not unpleasant, but distinctly organic. Humans, unlike most spacefaring species, seemed to bring the essence of their with them wherever they went. There was something else, too, something that made his sensitive nasal slits twitch. The metallic tang of old blood and the ozone scent of weapons fire, long since cleaned but never quite gone. Welcome aboard, officer, came the voice from deeper in the ship. I'm in the main cabin. Take your time, I'm not going anywhere. Made his way through the narrow corridors, nodding the practical design. No wasted space, everything built for efficiency rather than comfort. His scanner detected numerous weapon mounts throughout the ship, though most appeared to be empty. This was clearly a military vessel, or at least had been at some point. He found the human in what passed for a bridge, a cramped space with 3 chairs facing a bank of controls that looked like they'd been jury-rigged multiple times. The pilot was elderly even by human standards, his hair white as starlight, and his skin bearing the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in space. He wore a simple gray jumpsuit, clean but patched in several places. Names, the old man said without looking up from a cup of something steaming. I suppose you'll want to see my papers. That would be the standard procedure, replied, settling his considerable bulk into one of the passenger chairs. The officer was nearly 7 feet tall and built like the heavy-world predator his species had evolved from, but the old human seemed completely unimpressed by his size. Reached into a worn leather satchel beside his chair and pulled out a data pad. Fair warning, officer, it's a bit of a read. You might want to make yourself comfortable. Took the pad and activated his translation matrix. The first document that appeared was a standard civilian pilot's license, issued by Earth's colonial administration. Age 73, certified for all classes of civilian spacecraft up to medium cargo haulers. Clean record, no violations. This seems to be in order, said, then paused as he noticed there were dozens more documents in the file. What are all these other files? Well, said, taking a sip from his cup, you pulled me over, so I figure I ought to provide complete documentation. You know how bureaucracy works, never want to be missing paperwork when an officer asks for it. Curious despite himself, opened the next file. This one was military, a service record from something called the Terra Defense Force. He scrolled through quickly, expecting to find the usual brief stint of mandatory service most human colonies required. Instead, he found himself looking at 47 years of active duty service. The record began simply enough. Age 18, enlisted as a basic spacer, but as scrolled through the entries, his eyes began to widen. Promotion to gunner's mate after the Battle of Station. Commendation for bravery during the siege of New Shanghai. Battlefield promotion to lieutenant following the death of his commanding officer during the incident. Officer asked quietly, You doing all right there? You look a bit pale. Well, paler than usual for your species. Didn't respond. He was too busy reading. The Battle of the Asteroid Fields, where Lieutenant's destroyer had held off an entire enemy squadron for 6 hours while civilian transports evacuated. The Deep Space Campaign, where Commander had led a flotilla of light cruisers on a 3-month journey through uncharted territory to outflank enemy positions. The Omega Sector Rebellion, where Admiral had. Admiral's voice came out as barely a whisper. Retired, said simply. Figured I'd done my bit, wanted to see the galaxy at my own pace for a change. His hands trembled slightly as he continued scrolling. Operation, the largest military engagement in the history of the galaxy. A joint operation where human forces had stopped reading and looked up at the old man who was calmly finishing his drink. You were at. I was in command of the Third Fleet, confirmed. Hell of a thing. Biggest space battle anyone's ever seen before or since. We had ships from a dozen different species, all working together to push back the Devourers. Amazing what people can accomplish when they put aside their differences and focus on not getting eaten by monsters. The officer's translator was struggling with some of the tactical terminology in the files, but the numbers were clear enough. Third Fleet had consisted of over 800 ships from 6 different species. Under Admiral's command, they had not only survived contact with the Devourers, but had actually driven them back through the dimensional rift they'd emerged from. Sir, said, his voice formal now. Sir, I had no idea. The records show. The records show a lot of things, interrupted gently. Most of which happened a long time ago to a younger man who thought he knew everything about war. That man learned better. These days, I just fly where I want to fly, see things I never had time to see during the war. Speaking of which, I am sorry about the navigation lights. I was trying to watch the Horsehead Nebula rise over that gas giant back there, and I forgot to turn them back on when I started moving again. Look down at the data pad again. There were commendations from the Galactic Council, medals from a dozen different species, tactical analyses that were still classified at the highest levels of security. This wasn't just any human. This was quite possibly the most decorated military officer in the history of spacefaring civilization. And he was sitting in a patched jumpsuit drinking coffee from a ceramic mug that had Galaxy's Best Grandpa printed on the side. Sir, I should probably call my captain, said. Raised an eyebrow. That really necessary? Like I said, I'm sorry about the lights. Won't happen again. I know you fellows have jobs to do. Sir, with respect, I'm a junior patrol officer. I'm not qualified to handle this situation. My captain needs to know that you're here. Fair enough, said. Mind if I ask why? It's not like I'm under arrest or anything, just a routine traffic stop, right? Looked at the data pad one more time, at the long list of battles and campaigns, at the medals and commendations from species across the galaxy, at the records of a man who had quite literally helped save civilization. Sir, he said quietly, I've been a patrol officer for 8 years. In that time, I've pulled over pirates, smugglers, drunk pilots, and every other kind of spacer you can imagine. But I've never pulled over a living legend. Chuckled, a sound that somehow managed to be both humble and weary. Son, I'm just an old man trying to enjoy his retirement. The legend part? Well, that's just paperwork. But was already reaching for his communicator. Some things were bigger than a simple traffic stop, and he was smart enough to know when he was in over his head. His captain needed to know about this. As he waited for the connection to go through, he couldn't help but wonder what other, retired, humans might be wandering the galaxy, their incredible histories hidden behind humble facades and civilian licenses. The thought was both fascinating and slightly terrifying. Captain Ara materialized on the transport pad of her command ship with the controlled urgency of someone who had been pulled from important duties. Her crimson scales were perfectly arranged despite the hasty summons, and her golden eyes held the sharp intelligence that had earned her command of this sector patrol at the remarkably young age of 115. Report, she said simply as she stepped onto the bridge of her cruiser, the Stellar Justice. Ma'am, Lieutenant N began, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy. Officer made contact with a human vessel approximately 2 hours ago, routine traffic violation, but when he requested identification documents. The lieutenant paused, his translator working overtime to process what he was saying. Ma'am, the human provided complete military service records. The officer believes we may have encountered Admiral. Aura's inner eyelids blinked rapidly, a sign of surprise among her people. From the campaign. Unknown, ma'am. Officer is not qualified to verify the authenticity of the documentation, but he felt the situation warranted immediate escalation. The human has been cooperative and is currently waiting aboard his vessel. The captain was quiet for a long moment, accessing her personal database of military history. The name was not one that appeared in casual reading. It was mentioned in classified briefings, in strategic analyses that required the highest security clearance, in lessons taught at military academies across the galaxy about impossible victories and theoretical tactics that had somehow worked in practice. "Set course for officer's position," she commanded, "and have the communications officer prepare a priority channel to Fleet Command. If this is actually Admiral, there are people who need to know about it." The journey to the coordinates took 3 hours, during which Ara reviewed everything she could access about the campaign. The more she read, the more incredible the story became. An invasion by creatures that existed partially outside normal spacetime, making them nearly impossible to target with conventional weapons. A hastily assembled fleet from multiple species, most of whom had been enemies just years before. And at the center of it all, a human admiral who had somehow convinced them all to work together and found a way to fight monsters that shouldn't have been able to be fought. The tactical reports made for fascinating reading. Had done things that violated every principle of space combat doctrine, sending destroyers to fight battleships, using civilian vessels as part of military formations, coordinating attacks across light years of space with timing that should have been impossible. And somehow, it had all worked. When her ship arrived at the coordinates, she found officers' patrol craft docked with what looked like a civilian cargo hauler that had seen far too many battles. The hull was a patchwork of repairs, and her sensors detected weapon ports that had been welded shut but not removed entirely. "Sir," Kame's voice over the comm. "Captain Ara, thank you for coming. The human is still aboard his vessel. He's been quite patient." "I'll beam over directly," Ara replied. "Have you learned anything else?" "Yes, ma'am. I asked him about some of the battles mentioned in his records. He answered every question I had, with details that aren't in any public database. Either he really is Admiral, or he's the most well-informed imposter in galactic history." Ara activated her ship's transporters and found herself in the corridor of the human vessel. The first thing she noticed was how quiet it was, not empty, but peaceful, like a home rather than a military ship. The second thing she noticed was the smell that had mentioned, that distinctly organic scent that seemed to follow humans everywhere. She made her way to the bridge, where she found Officer sitting across from an elderly human who was working on what appeared to be a crossword puzzle. Both looked up as she entered. "Captain," said, rising to his feet with obvious relief. "Sir, this is Captain Ara of the Stellar Justice." The human set down his pen and stood as well, offering a slight nod of respect. "Captain, I understand there's some question about my identity." Ara studied him carefully. He was smaller than she'd expected, though she reminded herself that humans were generally small compared to most spacefaring species. His hair was white, his face lined with age, and his movements had the careful precision of someone whose body was no longer quite as reliable as it once was. He wore a simple jumpsuit and looked for all the world like any other elderly civilian pilot. But his eyes were different. They held the kind of depth that came from seeing too much, making impossible decisions, and living with the consequences. They were the eyes of someone who had commanded fleets and watched good people die for necessary causes. "Admiral," she said, testing the title. "Just if you don't mind," he replied. "I've been retired for 15 years now. Old habits die hard, but I try not to let the rank go to my head these days." Ara activated her personal scanner and ran it over the data Pad had been reviewing. The quantum signatures matched perfectly with Terra Defense Force encryption protocols. Unless someone had managed to forge quantum-level security features, these documents were genuine. "Sir," she said, her voice taking on the formal tone reserved for addressing superior officers. "Sir, are you really the admiral who commanded the Third Fleet during operation?" Sighed softly. "I am. Though I'd appreciate it if that information didn't spread too widely. I chose retirement for a reason, Captain. I've earned the right to be just another old pilot flying around the galaxy." "Of course, sir, but I have to ask, what are you doing out here? This is pretty far from Earth space." "Tourism," said with a slight smile. "I spent 47 years looking at star charts and tactical displays, seeing the galaxy as a series of strategic positions and supply routes. Now I'm seeing it for what it actually is: beautiful, vast, and full of wonders I never had time to appreciate during the war." Ara glanced at Officer, who was listening to every word with the fascination of someone meeting a historical figure. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, how do you deal with it? The recognition, I mean. Surely other officers must recognize you from time to time." "You'd be surprised," replied. Most people expect legends to look legendary. They expect someone in full dress uniform with medals and ceremonial weapons. They don't expect a guy in a patched jumpsuit flying a beat-up old freighter. Plus, I've gotten old. The face that's in the history books belongs to a man 30 years younger than me. But the records, interjected. Sir, your service record it's incredible. The battles you fought, the victories you achieved. The people who died under my command, added quietly. The mistakes I made that cost lives. The victories that came at prices too high to celebrate. Yes, officer, I won battles. But every victory in war represents a failure of diplomacy, and every strategic success comes with a list of names that you carry with you forever. The bridge fell silent for a moment. Aura found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about military glory and heroic legends. The man sitting before her didn't look like a conquering hero. He looked tired, wise, and perhaps a little sad. Sir, she said finally, are there others? Other retired Earth military officers traveling the galaxy? Some, confirmed. Not many from the senior ranks. Most of us were too old to want to go wandering after the war ended. But there are probably a few dozen former officers out there, seeing the sights, living quiet lives. Most of them were much younger when the war ended, so they've got more energy for adventure than I do. Any of them as? Aura paused, searching for the right word. Accomplished, suggested with a wry smile. Probably not. I stayed in longer than most, and I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time when history needed someone to make some very difficult decisions. But that doesn't make me special, Captain. It just makes me someone who was there when there was work to be done. Aura looked at the data pad again, at the impossible list of victories and campaigns. Sir, with all due respect, your record suggests otherwise. My record suggests I was very good at finding ways to kill people efficiently and keep my own people alive while doing it, replied. That's a useful skill during wartime, but it's not something to be proud of. The thing I'm most proud of from my entire military career is that I managed to end it. The war is over, Captain. My job is done, and I can finally just be a guy who likes to fly around and look at nebulae. Officer cleared his throat. Sir, what should I put in my report? And Aura looked at him, then at each other. The captain was clearly thinking the same thing this was going to create complications neither of them wanted. That's a very good question, Aura said slowly. A very good question indeed. Aura's communicator chirped with an incoming priority message just as she was considering the implications of the situation. She glanced at the display and felt her heart sink. Fleet Admiral X himself was requesting an immediate status update. Excuse me for a moment, she said stepping into the corridor to take the call. The holographic image of Fleet Admiral X materialized in front of her, his 6 arms gesturing impatiently. The hexapod leader's compound eyes glittered with the intensity that had made him one of the most respected military commanders in the galaxy. Captain Aura, my communications staff tells me you've requested a priority channel to report contact with a significant human military figure. Please explain. Sir, my patrol officer conducted a routine traffic stop and discovered that the civilian pilot is actually Admiral, formerly of the Terra Defense Force. His documentation appears authentic, and his knowledge of classified operations checks out. There was a long pause during which X's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Admiral, the architect of the victory, Captain, are you absolutely certain of this identification? As certain as I can be without full DNA verification, sir. The quantum signatures on his military records match Terra Defense Force protocols, and he's answered detailed questions about classified operations that only someone with his level of access would know. Where is he now? Aboard his civilian vessel, sir. He's been completely cooperative and seems to want nothing more than to continue his retirement in peace. Another pause, longer this time. Captain, I'm going to share some information with you that's classified at the highest levels. 3 months ago, we received intelligence suggesting that the Devourer entities may not have been completely eliminated during the campaign. There's a possibility they might attempt another incursion. Aura felt ice form in her veins. The Devourers were the stuff of nightmares, predators that consumed entire planets, leaving nothing behind but empty space. The campaign had been the only time in galactic history that anyone had successfully fought them off. Sir, you're suggesting we might need Admiral's expertise again. I'm suggesting that the galaxy's foremost expert on fighting devourers shouldn't be allowed to simply disappear into civilian life when we might need that expertise, X replied. However, I'm also aware that Admiral earned his retirement through 47 years of distinguished service. This is a delicate situation, Captain. Understood, sir. What are your orders? For now, nothing official, but I want you to maintain contact with the Admiral. If he's willing to serve as an informal consultant, that could prove invaluable. And Captain, this conversation never happened unless the situation escalates to the point where we actually need his help. The connection ended, leaving Aura staring at empty air and contemplating the weight of what she'd just learned. She returned to the bridge to find an officer discussing the differences between human and approaches to stellar navigation. Captain said, looking up as she entered, "You look like someone who just got some very unwelcome news." She hesitated for a moment, then decided on honesty. "Sir, I just spoke with Fleet Admiral X. There are developments that may eventually require your expertise." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. The casual, retired civilian disappeared, replaced by the sharp focus of someone who had commanded fleets in impossible battles. "The Devourers," he asked simply. "How did you?" "Because nothing else would make a fleet admiral personally interested in one retired human pilot," replied. "What's the intelligence?" "Sir, I'm not authorized to." Captain interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command. "If there's a possibility that those things are coming back, then authorization is a luxury we can't afford. What do you know?" Aura looked at Officer, who was listening with growing alarm. "Sir, this is highly classified." Officer said, turning to the young, "I'm going to ask you to step outside for a moment. What the captain and I are about to discuss is above your clearance level." "Sir, with respect, I don't take orders from." "Son," said gently, "I know this is awkward. You're not in my chain of command, and I have no authority over you. But if you stay here and hear what I think you're about to hear, it's going to change your life in ways you probably don't want. Some knowledge is a burden. Trust me on this." Looked at his captain, who nodded reluctantly. The young officer left the bridge, clearly unhappy but recognizing the wisdom in what it said. Once they were alone, Aura filled in on the intelligence reports. Dimensional anomalies in the same region where the Devourers had first appeared. Energy signatures that match the quantum resonance patterns from the original incursion. And most disturbing of all, reports from deep space monitoring stations of something massive moving in the void between galaxies. Listened without interruption, his expression growing more grave with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for several minutes. "How long do we have?" he asked finally. "Unknown. The anomalies could mean anything. They could be natural phenomena, or they could be advanced scouts preparing for another invasion. The analysis team thinks we have anywhere from 6 months to 6 years. And you want me to come out of retirement to help prepare for a war that might not even happen? Sir, you're the only person in the galaxy who has successfully fought them before. Your tactical innovations during were desperate improvisation by someone who was making it up as he went along," finished. "Captain, I didn't win that battle because I'm some kind of military genius. I won it because I was too stubborn to accept defeat and too lucky to get everyone killed trying. The Devourers are. They're not like any enemy we understand. They exist partially outside our reality, which means normal physics don't apply to them. Fighting them is like trying to punch a nightmare." "But you did fight them, successfully." "Once, in one specific set of circumstances that will probably never occur again, and it cost us nearly half the fleet, including some of the finest officers I've ever served with." Stood and walked to the small viewport, looking out at the stars. "Do you know what my last official act as Admiral was, Captain?" "No, sir." "I signed the death notifications for 87,000 and women who died under my command during. 87,000 people who followed my orders into battle and didn't come home. I can tell you the name of every ship captain who died, every squadron leader who gave their life to buy us a few more minutes, every junior officer who volunteered for missions they knew were suicide runs." He turned back to face her. "I'm not saying I won't help if the galaxy truly needs it, but I am saying that calling me back to service shouldn't be the first option. It should be the last resort when every other possibility has been exhausted." "What would you suggest, sir?" "Start with prevention. The Devourers appeared near the galactic rim, in a region where space-time is already unstable due to dark matter concentrations. Station monitoring platforms there, not just to watch for signs of their return, but to actively reinforce the dimensional barriers. We learned during that they can't fully manifest in areas where local space-time is artificially stabilized. Ara was taking notes, recording everything he said. What else? Train your people, not just in conventional space combat, but in the kind of improvised tactics you need when the enemy doesn't follow the laws of physics. Create mixed-species fleets and practice coordinated operations. The Devourers are strongest against homogeneous forces. They seem to adapt to consistent patterns. But throw together humans, hexapods, and Ash in the same squadron, and they have trouble predicting what you'll do next. And if prevention fails? Was quiet for a long moment. Then you call me, he said finally. And I'll do what I can, but Captain, I hope for all our sakes that it doesn't come to that. Because if we have to fight them again, it means we failed to learn the most important lesson from the first war. Which is that some wars are too terrible to win twice. Officer returned to the bridge a few minutes later, after and Ara had finished their conversation. The young looked between them, clearly sensing that something significant had occurred in his absence. Sir, he said to his captain, what should I put in my official report? Ara looked at, who nodded slightly. Put down that you conducted a routine traffic stop of a civilian vessel operated by a retired human pilot, she said. The pilot was issued a warning for navigation light violations and released without further incident. Any additional details are classified pending further review. Yes, ma'am, replied, though he looked disappointed at the anticlimactic ending to what had clearly been the most interesting day of his career. Gathered his things and prepared to return to his ship. Captain, it's been a pleasure meeting you both. Officer, you handled a difficult situation with professionalism and good judgment. You'll go far in the service. Sir said suddenly, can I ask you something off the record? Sure. Was it worth it? The war, I mean, all those battles, all those lives lost. Was it worth it? Consider the question seriously. Ask me that question in 100 years, son, when you are flying between the stars without fear, when the galaxy is at peace, when the Devourers are just a story told to cadets in military history classes. If that future comes to pass, then yes, it was worth it. If it doesn't, he shrugged. Then I guess we'll find out together. As returned to his small ship and prepared to continue his journey, Captain Ara found herself watching the stars with new eyes. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between galaxies, something might be stirring. Something that had once threatened all intelligent life and might do so again. But also out there, flying in a patched jumpsuit and drinking coffee from a mug that said, Galaxy's Best Grandpa, was a tired old human who had once stared into the abyss and somehow found a way to make it blink first. It was, she reflected, both terrifying and oddly comforting at the same time. As ship disappeared into hyperspace, heading toward a nebula he'd always wanted to see up close, Ara made a mental note to ensure that the Galactic Fleet's communication network always had his current coordinates on file. Just in case. After all, some legends were too valuable to lose track of, even when they insisted they were just ordinary people trying to enjoy their retirement.